Good evening, good morning. On behalf of the Dean of the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Warsaw, Professor Daniel Przastek, I would like to welcome all of you today. A few days ago, our faculty with our international partners, from all around the world, from New Zealand, from Centre for Strategic Studies, Victoria University of Wellington, from Israel, Center for National Security Studies, University of Haifa, from Czech Republic, Department of North American Studies, Charles University, from Mexico, from CIDE, and from the United States, Polish European Academic Center for Exchange and Research, Northeastern Illinois University. A few days ago, we started our four-part series of joint international seminars on the Biden administration and US global strategy. A few days ago, we have already discussed with our colleagues from Australia, New Zealand, the European Union, and the United States. We already discussed about transatlantic relations, and also we discussed on US and Indo-Pacific. Today, we would like to discuss with our colleagues from Latin America. We would like to discuss on implications for Latin America of the change in presidential administration in the United States. We ask our panelists today for answer for three main questions. What is the current state of US relations with Latin American region? What expectations do states in the Latin America region hold regarding the Biden administration? And the last question, what possible major changes will Biden administration make in American foreign policy towards Latin America? Before I will give the screen to my colleague, Professor Joanna Gocłowska-Bolek, I would like also to say thank you very much. Great thanks for colleagues from Haifa, Professor Benjamin Miller from Czech Republic, Professor Christopher Kozak and Jan Hornat from New Zealand, Professor Roberto Rabel, from my faculty, Professor Aleksandra Jarczewska, and of course from Mexico, from CIDE, Professor Jorge Schiavon, for a huge engagement in preparing this event today, and also last events which we held for last few days. Now I would like to, as I said, to give the floor, give the screen, Professor Joanna Gocłowska-Bolek. She is from Department of Area and Global Studies, from Faculty of Political Science and International Studies. She also focused in her research on Latin America, and she will chair today panel. So Joanna, screen is yours, and I wish all of you very, very fruitful discussion and debate. We couldn't hear you.
Okay. Again, thank you very much. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here as a part of the seminar that focuses on the future Biden administration towards and the strategy of his administration towards many regions. And tonight or this morning, depends on the hemisphere you're listening to, we will focus on Latin America. many thanks to Professor Zajączkowski and to Professor Aleksandra Jarszczewska as well for organizing and for the idea, in my opinion, excellent idea to organize this four-part seminar, and which allows us to analyze the strategy of Biden's administration, which may change the future of US-Latin America relations as well. And let's underline that President Joe Biden knows Latin America maybe better than almost any other US leader. In 8 years as vice president, Joe Biden visited the region 16 times. So more than any other US president or vice president. And as a senator, he was one of the architects of Plan Colombia, for example. So also great engagement in the region. However, Latin America has changed significantly in the last 4 years, and President Biden can't just pick up where Obama's foreign policy towards the region left off. And he will find a vastly different region. The hemisphere's economic forecast is downright glum. The pandemic has triggered a recession like no other, dragging down social indicators and amplifying unrest. For example, the number of people below the poverty line is expected to reach 231 million, the same level as of 2005. And add to this the reality of social unrest, populism, corruption, and you will see why the region needs more hemispheric cooperation than ever. And President Biden and his advisors promise a shift in a tone and a style in Latin America, backing the notion of a Bali dictating policy and President Donald Trump's America First doctrine. And they are calling for greater cooperation and multilateral dialogue on wide-ranging issues like COVID-19, job creation, migration, and improved governance. This is quite a wide range of issues that should be followed by the Biden's administration, and quite important ones. I'm really happy that today we will have with us such a great group of specialists on Latin America, and we will be able to discuss many of these issues and also the nuances of the Biden's administration policy towards the region. But before I introduce the first panelist, however, let me mention a couple of technical issues that will help us to proceed. First of all the participants of the seminar on Zoom, please keep your microphones and cameras turned off. And you will be able to add your questions on a chat meeting, and we will try to answer this question just after the presentations of panelists. There are also people watching us on the YouTube streaming, and these people we kindly invite also to ask questions. and you will have to go through a small registration process on YouTube, which is not complicated. So if you want to ask a question on a chat on YouTube, you have to register and then write down, and we will also address these questions after the presentations. So all the panelists will have about 10 minutes to present. There will be two PowerPoint presentations, as I understand. And after each presentation, I will say some words of introduction, and then pass the microphone to the other panelists. And after all the presentation, we will have time to ask and answer the question, and maybe also to address some issues that were raised by the other panelists. So you will have many possibilities to ask question, answer, and summarize after all. And I will introduce each person very shortly, because we have the whole biograms together with the program of our seminar. So if you want to know more about the experience of our distinguished guest, you can follow this in the program on our faculty website. As first panelist, we will ask to present Professor Tony Payan, the director of the Center of the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. And Professor Tony Payan is also a professor of social sciences at the Universidad Autónoma de Ciudad Juárez in Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua. And Professor Payan was also a professor of political science at the University of Texas at El Paso. And his research focuses primarily on border issues, border studies, particularly the US-Mexico border. And his work centers largely on issues of borderlands as areas of habitation, including the various conditions that affect life in liminal spaces. And I believe that migration issue and border problem will be one of the most important that Biden's administration has to address just in the very first days of this year. So I'm really happy that we may start just with this issue. Professor Tony Payan, the microphone and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you to Professor Jakub Zajalkowski, and of course to Aleksandra Jozewska for invitation, of course to you for moderating this panel, and thank you to Professor Schiavon for inviting me to be here. I will take advantage of these 10 minutes to address the several issues regarding the Biden administration in Latin America. I think the very first thing that will matter in how much attention Biden will pay to Latin America is going to be the fact that he has a full plate in front of him. I mean, there are simultaneous crises going on in the United States, and I think they will probably suck most of the oxygen of his day in office. Of course, everyone knows the pandemic is number one. He has to address that issue. The United States is one of the worst countries in addressing the pandemic, along with Mexico and Brazil. So clearly they're going to, that's going to be a priority number one. It has been a priority from way back in the campaign. There is also a considerable economic crisis, although I think, unlike other countries, the United States has the ability to print money, to borrow money, and address that. And so one of his initial moves is to essentially present before Congress an almost $2 trillion bill to stimulate the economy and continue stimulating the American economy. That is also going to take a lot of his political time. There is also an important crisis, I think, social division crisis in the United States that he has to address, and that has to do with the white supremacist movements and things like that. They have to be addressed at some level. I think that'll be transferred over to DHS and the Justice Department, but it's a concern because his message is one of unity, so he's going to have to pay attention to that. And the last thing is on the impeachment of Donald Trump. It's also going to take a little bit of time in the Senate. So will the Senate be able to address his legislative agenda effectively and quickly? We don't know yet, but I think those are going to be internal issues that will affect his ability to pay attention to international affairs. I think that in regards to Latin America, I think that the one thing that we have to think about is the fact that Latin America is composed of very different countries. And I think the idea of Latin America is almost a fiction in many, many ways. Latin America is not monolithic, and I think different countries have different agendas. It's structurally very difficult to figure out what Latin America is. Of course, Mexico continues to be the most important country in Latin America for the United States for many different reasons. The joint border, immigration, trade and economic integration, a certain cultural, historical, and demographic number of linkages between the two countries, and they will continue to be important. I think this is where I think Biden will also try to address the issue of immigration, which Mexico will stand to benefit quite a bit, because half of the 10.7 million undocumented migrants in the United States are of Mexican origin. So clearly, Mexico stands to gain quite a bit in terms of a potential immigration bill. But I think that the difficulties are going to essentially be based on the fact that the leadership in Latin America is a relatively mediocre leadership, from Bolsonaro to López Obrador to other countries. They're not leaders that have a coherent vision of the region. Latin America does not have an idea of where the continent, the region as a whole, should be. These are very insular leaders, whether it be Bolsonaro, whether it be Fernandez, whether it be López Obrador, and many other leaders. They tend to have an agenda that is very, very isolationist. None of them has taken an opportunity to lead. And the two countries that could potentially lead, the largest economies in Latin America, Brazil and Mexico, are currently engaged in an exercise of dealing with their own crisis. Of course, they got a public health crisis, an economic crisis, social crisis, and of course, a governance crisis, emerging governance crisis in both countries. So I don't think that they are in a position to lead the region as a whole. Of course, Mexico and Brazil have never really truly been leaders in Latin America. They're leaders de facto by the fact that they're the largest economies, but they've never actually had a plan. These countries have actually never sat down to think about Latin America and the goals of the region in development. And so I think that's not likely to emerge. We should not expect any cohesion in a Latin American agenda. So the dealings from Washington to Latin America will continue to be very bilateral. It'll be on what the presidents of each country in Latin America want to do, each of the president wants to do, and what it wants to accomplish, and its own networks towards Washington. And I think Biden will not have the time to pay attention to Latin America. We have to remember that most of the attention that Washington pays to Latin America is negative attention. It's not about leading the region towards a positive agenda. It's about responding to other countries' incursions in Latin America. And the latest incursion, of course, is going to be the role that China is going to play in Latin America. There's a lot of concern in the United States about China and China's incursions in Latin America. But I suspect the United States is not going to be able to do very much about that, even though it is a great concern to Americans. The United States does not have a plan, and above all, it does not seem to have the resources or even the willingness to find the resources to invest in Latin America. And I think that Latin America will be playing that card between China and the United States, but I think it's an unsuccessful card because Latin America does not have a plan as a coherent region. I think that although Biden is somebody who knows Latin America very well, understands Latin America very well, we have to remember that his domestic agenda itself, even though he's more internationalist than President Trump ever was, the reality is that he has a commitment to the American people as well. For example, just today, he signed the Buy American executive order, which means that he is favoring, much like Trump did, the U.S. government's bidding processes and the U.S. government the U.S. manufacturing, and so he's pushing the idea that America comes first, even though he's doing it with a very soft hand. Still, he knows that the commitment is to American farmers, to American workers, etc. And that is going to take most of his time. So I don't think that the rest of Latin America should expect very much in terms of a leadership. Unfortunately for Latin America, and I want to emphasize the idea that Latin America is essentially a continent adrift, a region without a plan, is the fact that the OAS itself is bankrupt. I know that in Mexico and other countries in Latin America, they tend to pay a lot of attention to the OAS because it's the largest organization where Latin Americans can express their concerns. The reality is that the OAS is very divided. And there are other initiatives competing with for attention. For example, the Sao Paulo group, which is kind of more on the left. I'm not sure it's quite left there, more than autocratic. I'm not sure what the agenda, the economic agenda is, because they obviously can't accomplish very much. But Latin America cannot look to the OAS, I don't think, to push its regional agenda in Washington. The OAS is for all practical purposes, and I'm sorry to say, I'm pessimistic that the OAS has any functionality any longer. It's mostly a bankrupt organization. That's not going to be the forum where Latin America can articulate its vision, if there is one, and I insist there isn't one, to try to push that agenda jointly in Washington, D.C. Very soon, I think crises will show up around the world, and the negative attention that Latin America often gets from Washington will assert itself. We have to remember George Bush first visited Mexico and paid a lot of attention to Latin America and presumed to speak Spanish. But very quickly, the September 11th crisis came in. That sucked the oxygen out of the US attention, and Latin America was left behind. I suspect that that's going to happen with Biden. Biden has got a full domestic plate, and then he's got other issues to deal with in the Middle East. Obviously, the collapse of Russia itself. It seems that Russia is entering into an important political crisis. That's going to draw a lot of attention. Europe itself is in crisis to a large extent. That's going to draw a lot of attention. That's a very important partnership for the United States. And of course, China's expansion. And so where is Latin America in there? Again, with a degree of negative attention. And to conclude, I think, does the United States have the sustained attention, the resources, and the ability to lead Latin America? I don't think so. And I don't think there is even the interest to lead in Latin America. I don't think the United States is fundamentally interested, and it's not going to be interested under the Biden administration in leading Latin America. Latin America is a continent adrift, has been a continent adrift, and I think will continue to be a continent adrift. It would be best for Latin America to actually find its common interests in a broader negotiating table, and then to articulate them, and then to present them as a whole to Washington. But unfortunately, the countries that could potentially lead, Brazil and Mexico, are very much engaged in their own crises. And so I think for the next 4 years, the US will pay bare minimal attention to Latin America, and Latin America will be dealing with its own crises. And at the end of the 4 years, Latin America will be a sicker, poorer, and less organized continent than we think, with a good opportunity perhaps for China to make inroads. But remember, China's interests remain in Beijing and in China, and China has no particular interest in enhancing democracy and governance in Latin America. China has a great interest in accessing Latin American resources and Latin American markets. It is a neo-colonial power for the 21st century. And I think Latin America would be deluded to think that China may be the next ally that may actually cohere a Latin American vision and lead Latin America anywhere. The problems of Latin America are Latin America's. Latin America must fix them, and the Latin American leadership must address them as a region. I think it would be a mistake for Latin American leaders to look to other countries to try to figure out what Latin America should do and what its future in the next 4 years should be. And I think I've eaten away my 10, 12 minutes. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to this dialogue.
Thank you very much, Professor Payan, for your overview, although pessimistic one, or maybe more realistic one. And I will pass the floor now to Professor Maria Herminia Tavares de Almeida, senior researcher at Centro Brasileiro de Análise e Planejamento and professor at the University of São Paulo at the graduate programs of International Relations and of Political Science. At USP, she has been a dean of the Institute of International Relations, and she holds her PhD in political science from the University of São Paulo and made postdoctoral studies at the University of California. As a political scientist, she conducted research on public policies and Brazilian political institutions, and more recently on public opinion and foreign policy in Brazil. So I guess that main interest of your presentation will focus on Brazil and the US relations. So Professor Maria, the floor is yours, the screen is yours. You will have 10 minutes to make the overview.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very glad for this invitation, for the possibility of seeing my old friend Jorge and to meet my new friends from University of Warsaw. I'm really delighted to be here. Of course, I'll focus my presentation on Brazil, but I completely agree with the view of Tony Payan regarding the challenges and the problems of Latin America to find a common ground, to find a common policy to go forward. Jakob sent us 3 very interesting questions, and so we could organize our presentation. I will address the questions, but before, I would like to mention some analytical issues and some background issues that allow people that don't know Brazil very well to understand what is going on and what can be the future of US-Brazil relations. Brazil conforms to the IR literature definition of middle power, or an intermediate country, intermediate power. How can I move my presentation? Okay. Brazil has no hard power. Its foreign policy strategies aim at some point to balancing great powers' influence. Brazil always has shown a strong preference to multilateralism and an intense participation in multilateral organizations where they try to build coalitions. Brazil also deploys some regional activism as conflict manager or as mediator in order to build a kind of consensual guidance, if not leadership. I think leadership is a too strong a word for what Brazil have tried to do in Latin America. On the other hand, Brazil is a middle power in the backyard of a great power, and United States. So the relations to United States always were important and have an impact in the Brazil relations to the region, to Latin America, to South America, and also to the world. Relations to United States have been central in the definition of the Brazilian foreign strategies. Regarding specifically the bilateral relations, both countries have strong, even if declining, economic ties. The United States is the second hugest trade partner of Brazil. The first one is China, and the United States used to be the first, but has lost its position to China. And also Brazil, US direct investments have been always important for the Brazilian economic development. Brazil also had strong historical ties to the United States in the realm of science, in cultural relations, in military cooperation. So it's a very dense relationship. After the Cold War, I think that a pragmatic foreign policy has been established and molded the relations between the two countries. On one hand, Brazil tried to preserve a certain independence in multilateral arenas. On the other hand, Brazil dealt, and the United States dealt with their bilateral relations in a pragmatic way, discussing their differences related to trade, to intellectual property, to some US policies in Latin America or in South America, and some international issues like the Iraq invasion, Iran's nuclear conflict, and so on. And pragmatism has been the dominant tone of the Brazilian foreign policy regarding the United States for long, and since long, until 3 years ago. 3 years ago, as you may know, an election led a populist leader, extreme right populist leader to the federal government. Bolsonaro has been elected, and it promoted a dramatic change in the in the Brazilian foreign policy. There has been a stronger alignment to extreme right ideology and to Trumpism, not to the United States, but to Trumpism. The administration, in a matter of fact, the Trump administration and the admiration for Trump structure the rhetoric and the relations to the United States. On the other hand, the whole of the foreign policy was guided by a kind of conspiracy theory that we are in a global war against globalism. If we look to what this means, according to our Minister of Foreign Affairs, we had a friend, which was Trump, and Trump's United States, and we have a lot of different foes in the international arena. They are the big media, the narco-socialism, the corruption, the organized crime, the political correctness, climatism, that is to say, the protection of the environment, racialism, that is to say, anti-racial demands, what the minister calls COVIDism, that is to say, an exaggerated worry about COVID-19, terrorism, multilateralism, gender ideology, and so on, Christophobia, mega billionaires international schemes, that is to say Soros, and what intellectual international elitism, and finally what the minister calls the market malwares, so that is to say China, or the whole foreign policy was dominated by this kind of fancy theory about the world, with very bad consequences for our actual relations to the world. Bolsonaro has been the last Trumpist, I think, outside the United States. He publicly campaigned for Trump's election. He supported Trump's narrative about electoral fraud. He has made a very ambiguous speech about the Capitol Hill invasion 2 weeks ago. And Brazil has been the last G20 country to acknowledge Biden's election. Biden's election actually left Bolsonaro hanging by a thread. He lost his ground in international affairs, and nowadays there are strong discussions in Brazil about what should follow, and about the need to take out the present Minister of Foreign Relations and replace him for someone that can rebuild relations to the United States. What will happen, probably? What are the issues now? I think that eventually long-term patterns of relations between the United States and Brazil will prevail, and some kind of normalization after this folly will prevail. But I see 6 foreseeable conflictual issues, conflictual themes. The first one is the traditional trade issues. Issues regarding tariffs on commodities, soybean, aluminium, and other, discussion about trade sanctions, discussion about trade agreements. Brazil in the past opposed the idea of free trade with the United States, and I think these issues will come back in a more normal relations. But there are new issues that can be more difficult to tackle. The first one is COVID-19 and the relations to WHO. Bolsonaro had a denial attitude regarding the pandemic and a very tough position against the WHO as part of this anti-multilateralism that prevail in the Brazilian foreign policy. Brazil opposed, and I think still opposed, and still opposes any measure of coordination, of international coordination to face the challenges of the global pandemic. Of course, the situation of Brazil regarding COVID-19 is not easy. We are one of the hugest countries with the hugest numbers of infected and death due to the SARS-CoV-2. And this has a very negative impact on the international image of Brazil and on its capacity, including to have a coherent policy regarding the pandemic in the country. So I think this is an issue that can be tense, depending on the ways the Biden administration wants to deal with this issue at the international level, at the level of the reform of WHO and other forms of coordination and cooperation. The second and probably the most important issue is environment and commitment to international environment rules. Brazil had an important, not so important, but I had some say during the negotiations of the Paris Agreement. And under Bolsonaro, all domestic policies were against and destructive regarding the policies and the tools to prevent the fires and the destruction of the rainforest. And I think this can be a very, very contentious issues in the relations between Brazil and the United States, since Biden's administration is giving a lot of importance to international agreements, to coming back to Paris Agreement, to have policies of green recovery and all that, that in a certain way we will oppose the way the president of Brazil and the United States deal with this issue. Of course, there's a lot of internal domestic reaction to the presidential policies regarding environmental issues, and also a lot of initiatives from international investors, from national firms, from organized civil society that can give basis to other ways of dealing with the issue. But anyway, I think this can be a conflictuous and a contentious issue in the relations between Bolsonaro's government and Biden's administration. The fourth issue is
Professor Maria, we have 1 minute left.
Okay, in 1 minute I'll finish. The fourth issue is the relations to Chinese and Chinese investment, especially with Chinese Huawei participation in the new 5G market in Brazil. We will have an auction in 2021 to decide who will be the players of the building of a 5G network in the country, and this creates a lot of tension with the United States and in the context of disputes between China and the US. There are also human rights issue, especially recent positions of Brazil in the United Nations Council for Human Rights. And finally, there is the Venezuelan crisis. Recently, up to a certain moment, Brazil tried to be a kind of representative of the worst ideas of United States about how to deal with the Venezuelan crisis. I think that Biden administration will change the terms of this discussion, and Brazil will be out of this discussion. And although Venezuela is an important trade partner to Brazil, and also although we have frontier problems and immigration problems of Venezuela, of people coming from Venezuela to Brazil. So I see the possibility of normalizing and introducing some pragmatism in the relations between Brazil and the United States, but also I see at least those 6 issues that can be conflictuous in the relations between both countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your inspiring presentation and for raising so many problems or important issues in front of the Biden's administration. Probably we will come back to the Brazilian perspective during our discussion, because it is one of the most important issues from the Latin American point of view. But now I would like to move to the other country, other perspective probably. And I would like to invite as a speaker our next panelist, Professor Władimir Rówiński, who is director of the Laboratory of Politics and International Relations and associate professor of the Department of Political Studies at ISESI University in Cali, Colombia, in addition to coordinating the Pacific Alliance Studies program. And Professor Władimir graduated from Irkutsk State University in Russia, majoring in history and international relations. And he also holds his PhD in international development and cooperation from Hiroshima University in Japan. And before joining ISESI University, Professor Władimir worked with Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, Education and Research Institutions in Russia, Japan and Colombia. And Professor Władimir's main area of expertise is Russian and Asian countries' relations with Latin America. And he is currently co-chairing Asia and the Americas section at Latin American Studies Association. So I guess that apart from focusing on Colombia at this discussion, he will give us quite nice perspective on the Russian-Latin American relations, as well as an element of the broader US Latin America perspective and strategy. And so this is my short introduction, and now I would like to give the floor to Professor Władimir Rówiński. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and I'm very happy to be here in this space. And thank you to the University of Warsaw and to Jorge for this invitation. I will likely to talk about Russia perhaps in the Q&A session because I'd like to use this opportunity to talk about Colombia and the changes it faces because of the new administration, Biden administration in Washington. And I'll also try to stick to 10 minutes so we can have space for Q&A. And let me begin by saying that before we can talk about the current relation between the United States and Colombia, I think it is necessary to point out that Colombia, of course, is not Mexico, not Brazil by any scale, But Colombia has been one of the closest allies of the United States in Latin America and the Caribbean for many years. And while it is true that the history of US-Colombia relations do include some unpleasant episodes that are still remembered by Colombians, we can mention the US role in Panama's independence in the beginning of the 20th century, or some tensions associated with the former Colombian president Ernesto Samper in the 1990s. But still, for the most part of the last century and 2 decades of the 21st century, Colombia has been a very strong supporter of the US policy in the Western Hemisphere. And the main reason of such continuity is the fact that both the United States and Colombia, I believe, almost always managed to take a full advantage of their bilateral ties. And for example, in the 1950s, Colombia was the only Latin American nation which participated in the Korean War. And while the United States wanted Colombia to be part of the multinational forces that fought against the communist North Korea and China, the government of Colombia wanted to modernize its armed forces in the context of the already started armed conflict in the country. And the US supplied arms, plus the training of the Colombian militaries by the US Army turned out to be very useful for Colombia. Another benefit of the Colombian participation in the Korean War was the substantial US aid in the 1960s. And later on, following the emergence of the illegal drug consumption as a key issue on the US domestic political agenda, Washington started playing the crucial role in the fight with the illegal drug trafficking originated in Colombia, especially in the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s. In the framework of the famous Plan Colombia that was already mentioned by Joanna in the introduction today. And this Plan Colombia turned Colombia into one of the 3 top recipients of the US military aid around the world at that time, and helped the Colombian government to gain a significant advantage in fighting the leftist guerrilla in the country. But another factor to take into consideration is trade and commerce. According to the Colombian Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Tourism, in 2020, the United States remained the main commercial partner of Colombia, and it represented almost 1/3 of the total exports of goods. The data available from the Colombian National Administrative Department of Statistics shows the trade between the 2 countries amounted between January and October 2020, a total of $15 billion. And this number is significantly lower than the year before, when trade between Colombia and the United States accounted for almost $40 billion. But the decrease is likely to do almost entirely with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemics. And I believe that it is not indicative of any long-term change of the trend. And in this context, it is also important to point out that the United States remains one of the key foreign investors, and the US investments represented almost 1/5 of all foreign direct investments that Colombia received in 2019. Now, this picture would not be complete without mentioning 2 other issues that are closely linked to the relations between Washington and Bogota, although they may not seem to be an explicit part of the US-Colombia bilateral agenda. The fact is that the Colombian foreign policy has been almost always characterized by placing emphasis on one specific issue in its foreign policy strategy. And as a result, the Colombian decision makers tend to mobilize all available resources towards reaching the goals of that specific issue, leaving the other topics somewhat unattended. And from this perspective, it is possible to identify 2 such goals that have been pursued by Colombia during the last decade, and which surely made its way to the core of Colombia's relations with the United States, even though this incursion took different formats and both sides used one type of political instruments in one case and the other type in the other case. Besides, both issues continue to be of pivotal importance for both Colombia and for that part of the US policy that is now designing or redesigning toward the region at this moment. The first of this issue is the Colombian peace process, which ended the longest internal armed conflict in the Western Hemisphere by signing a peace treaty between the Colombian government and the leftist guerrilla FARC in November 2016, despite of the resistance of the influential conservative forces in Colombia and the division of the Colombian population almost by half, one in favor and another against the peace agreement. The then president of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, spared no efforts in ensuring the external support to the peace deal. And it was Joe Biden, then the vice president of the United States, who played one of the crucial roles in supporting the Colombian peace process and making sure it goes forward. However, the conservative government that took power in Bogota in 2018 had a different view on the peace process. And while it continued complying with the formal letter of the treaty, it did not keep the peace process as a priority, neither in domestic nor foreign policy agenda. A new issue of concern emerged, and this issue was Venezuela. All the efforts of the government of Iván Duque were directed towards the goals of changing the Maduro regime in Venezuela and replacing it with Juan Guaidó, the auto-proclaimed interim president supported by the United States. Of course, it would be very wrong to claim that the Colombian support to the US policy towards Venezuela under the Trump administration was only because Bogota wanted to stay tuned with Washington. Colombia has its own very good reasons to wish seeing the Maduro regime go away. After all, it is Colombia that has to deal with the millions of the Venezuelan refugees who flee their own country because of the fears for their lives, lack of employment, and the unacceptable quality of life there. In addition, the Colombian trade relations with Venezuela have been severely damaged, ended, basically, during the Chavista times. But there are many influential Colombian business persons who still dream of winning back the formerly very lucrative Venezuelan market for Colombians. Last but certainly not least is the fact that the topic of Venezuela turned into a valuable political resource in Colombia, and to a lesser extent, but still quite visible, as a valid political resource in the United States politics. During the latest presidential campaign in the United States, many conservative Colombian politicians openly campaigned in favor of Trump's re-election. Some experts even believe that the Colombian support is one of the reasons why some Democrats lost their seats on the House of Representatives. And although the Colombian President Duque was quick to recognize Joe Biden's victory, there is no question that the outcome of the US presidential election is not the one that the current Colombian government was hoping for. And the reason for the current pessimism in Bogota can be explained by the expectations in Colombia that Biden's administration will return to the politics conducted by the Obama administration. And many of the new members of Biden's team are well known in Colombia for placing emphasis on the issues of human rights, trade unions, wider freedoms for political opposition. And there is little doubt that the implementation of peace process will once again rise to the top of the bilateral US-Colombia agenda, especially if to take into account the fact that the person appointment to the post of presidential advisor in Latin America is Juan Sebastián González, a native Colombian, and who during the last 3 years was on the board of the Washington office on Latin America, a well-known non-governmental organization which primary objective is the promotion of human rights, democracy, and equal opportunities in Latin America and the Caribbean. However, from my perspective, there is also hope that the new administration could represent an opportunity for Colombia. First of all, in terms of revising its stand on the Venezuelan issue and helping finding the way out of the deadlock scenario, which is it now. While many experts are concerned that the Colombian unprecedented support to Trump's re-election and the Republicans may complicate the search for a consensus on the topics of bilateral agenda, I think the issue of Venezuela has enjoyed a constant bipartisan support on the Capitol Hill, and the interest of Colombia and the United States with regard to Colombia coincide. And after all, both sides need each other in order to reach any plausible progress in the Venezuelan scenario. Well, let me finish here by saying that it is obvious that contrary to the times of the Trump administration, the current government of Colombia will no more have 100% coincidence between its own ideological stand and the one held by the new administration in Washington. Nevertheless, as I was mentioning in the beginning, the ties between Colombia and the United States have been historically very strong, with high level of political, economic, and military interdependence. And Colombia undoubtedly will remain with its role as a faithful ally of the United States in the Western Hemisphere, whatever happens. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Rowiński, for your quite realistic, I believe, illustration of the Colombia-US relations. Let's keep our fingers crossed for a Colombian perspective to be adopted to this administration. We will see. Now I would like to introduce our next panelist, Professor Jorge Chavian, who is Professor of International Relations at the International Studies Department at Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económicas, which is CIDE. He is coordinator of the interdisciplinary program of migration at CIDE and executive director of Mexico, the Americas, and the World Project. In his research and his publications, he concentrates on Mexican foreign policy, history of Mexican international relations, migration, sub-state diplomacy, paradiplomacy, MICTA, public opinion and foreign policy, regional integration in Latin America and North America institutions, decentralization, and federalism in Latin America and North America, US, Mexico, and Canada relations. But maybe most important what I can say about Professor Jorge Chavian is that his relations with the University of Warsaw, and especially with our department, are really very fruitful, and I hope for even more fruitful cooperation in the near future. And Professor Chavian is one of the person who has helped a lot in organizing this seminar, and I'm really very I thank you very much once again for your participation and your help, and hope that this relevant discussion will have some follow-up as well. So now this is from my side. I give the floor to Professor Chavian. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Joanna, for such a generous presentation, and thank you to the University of Warsaw for organizing this great panel and this great series of panels of seminars. Especially thank you, Jakub, and thank you, Alexandra, but most important, thank you, Tony, thank you, Maria Herminia, thank you, Vladimir, and thank you, Anita, for accepting to participate in this great panel. If my presentation is half as good as yours, then this will be a wonderful panel and we'll have a wonderful discussion. So what I would like to talk about in the course of the next 10 minutes is the Biden administration and the US-Mexico relationship. Let me start with some premises. First and foremost, it is good news for the US, I would say, the election of President Biden, but it's also good news for international organizations. It's very good news for Latin America, and it's good news for the US-Mexico relationship. Why? First and foremost, because now we have a professional politician in the US presidency. And this means that we will no longer see what I call the Twitter diplomacy of President Trump, deciding foreign affairs from his room at 3 in the morning with his telephone that probably was a more intelligent phone than he was. So what we will see with a professional politician now as president of the United States is that we will see a more institutional conduction both of domestic policy in the United States, but also of regional and foreign policy. And that means that it will be more predictable and that it will be done through the institutions of the US government, that is the Secretariat of State or the Department of State mostly, and the other areas of the US government. Second, it is good news in the sense that his most important priority in terms of domestic policy is rebuilding America. That is, unite America again against fragmentation and against polarization. And that will also help in terms of attending its other two priorities that Professor Payan mentioned, which are the pandemic and the economic crisis. So that is very good news, because what we see at the domestic level, we will also see at the regional and at the global level. What he will try to do is to rebuild the institutions that have worked since at least the end of the Second World War to generate governance in the international system. By the way, these institutions were mostly created by the United States and its allies. And in order to do so, then it requires to rebuild the relations of the United States with its most important allies. And within those are obviously Europe, some countries in Asia, especially Japan, but also the countries in the Americas, and specifically its two neighbors, which are Canada and Mexico. So I couldn't agree more with Professor Payan, with Professor Rubinsky, and with Maria Herminia Tavares, Professor Tavares, that the priorities of the Biden administration will be mostly to solve its internal crisis, and the regional and the international will be second, to put it some way. However, within this, I might say that Mexico is different. Mexico and Canada are different for one central reason, because we share a border with the United States. And in the case of Mexico, it's a 3,000-kilometer border, one of the largest borders that we have in the Americas. And also because Mexico, few people know this, but Mexico is the US first trading partner. It has displaced China, it has displaced Canada, and now Mexico is the US first trading partner. And also, we have 36 million people of Mexican origin living in the US. That is 36 million. That is very similar to the population of Poland, which is 38 million. So imagine having this huge diaspora, from which 12 million are born in Mexico, and from which half of them, approximately 5 million, are in an irregular migratory situation in the United States. So yes, Mexico is very important for the United States, but obviously the United States is extremely important for Mexico because we export more than 80% of our exports to the US. We receive 50% of our imports from the US. Approximately 50% of all foreign direct investment that Mexico receives comes from the United States, and we receive $30 billion every year as remittances from these Mexicans living abroad. So to say it simply, Mexico will be different from the rest of Latin America in terms of priority because the US requires for its own domestic policies to have cooperation with Mexico. That is what's called intermestic. The US-Mexico relation is intermestic in the sense that what happens at the domestic politics of both countries is relevant for the international affairs of both countries, that is for the bilateral relation. So the Biden election is a great opportunity for both Mexico and the US to relaunch its bilateral relations. However, let me share with you some bad news, and that is not from the US side. From what we can see, we have relatively good news in the sense that there will be a chance to address all this crisis that we have. The bad news comes from the Mexican side, and it has to do a lot with the López Obrador administration, which started with the wrong foot with the Biden administration. Now, let me explain to you why from the Mexican side things haven't been as good as we wanted with the bilateral relation? Well, first and foremost, President López Obrador made a visit to the US in July of 2020 during the electoral campaign, in which he gave his full support to Trump for the election. This was not very well seen by the Biden administration or the Democrats. Also, then it was one of the last presidents in the world to congratulate President-elect Biden as President of the United States. And when we did it, the letter that we wrote was one of the coldest ones I've seen in Mexican diplomacy in the course of the last decades. Then López Obrador offered asylum to Assange, which is considered a terrorist in the United States. And then Mexico changed its national security law in order to make US officials working in Mexico having to report whatever they did to the Mexican government. So, and finally, the Mexican government and the López Obrador administration was very late in terms of condemning the Capitol invasion and also doing almost everything to generate a coalition within the relationship between the two countries. However, there are good news, and the good news is that this intermestic agenda of Mexico and the United States has to make Mexico work with the US and the US work with Mexico. And what will be the central issues of the agenda in the Mexico-US relationship? Well, first and foremost, it will be migration, because we're still seeing flows of close to 1 million people, mostly from the northern triangle of Central America, that's Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, crossing through Mexico, trying to go into the United States. And you also have almost 12 million irregular workers within the United States, from which half of them are Mexicans. So migration will be in the top of the US-Mexico relationship agenda. Then security, as always, the most important priority of US foreign policy vis-a-vis Mexico is security, because we have, as I said, and we share a 3,000-kilometer border through which everything can go through: migrants, drugs, probably even something worse like terrorists. So that is why it's so important for Mexico to cooperate with the US in terms of guaranteeing the security of its southern border. Trade and investment. We now have a new treaty, which is the new NAFTA, which is the TEMEC, or the UMSCA treaty. And there we have a good institutional relationship to manage trade and investment. But things that will change and probably generate also another collision, as Maria Herminia was saying in the case of Brazil, and also Vladimir in the case of Colombia, will be the agenda of the Biden administration, which will be similar to that of the Obama administration, and that is in terms of climate change and energy. The Biden administration is taking very seriously clean energies and going back to the Paris Agreement. Mexico, on the other side, is betting for dirty energies, mostly oil and natural gas. So there will be a coalition in this sense, and also in terms of the huge investments that many entrepreneurs from the US have made in Mexico for clean energies, and now are being under scrutiny by the López Obrador administration, but also in terms of something that the Trump administration didn't care about, but the Biden administration will, and that is human rights and democracy in Mexico, but also the rule of law in our country. It will be of paramount relevance for the Biden administration to make sure that Mexico has rule of law, because you can't have the Wild West in your southern border in terms of guaranteeing the security and the stability of Mexico for US security. So there we might find also a coalition of interest between the two countries. I see I have 1 minute left. So let me, in this last minute, tell you what the strategy has been historically in terms of Mexico dealing with this very asymmetric relationship with the US, and which I hope we will be able to continue doing that. And that is a strategy, by the way, that can be replicated by any other country in the world which wants to invest the resources to do so. And that's called multi-level diplomacy. Mexico has perfectly understood how to penetrate the US political system, because in the US, all politics are local politics, and there are huge checks and balances within the system, and it's a very porous system. And therefore, Mexico has done, and that's the way we have survived US hegemony, through this multi-level diplomacy. What is this? We do have executive diplomacy, yes, with the President of the United States, between presidents, but we also work what's called administrative diplomacy. Each and every ministry of the two countries works on an every day-to-day basis to solve the administrative delays of the bilateral relation. Third, we have parliamentary diplomacy, and that is how Mexico works with the US Congress in terms of doing lobbying with them, not only in Washington, but also in their electoral constituencies at the local level. And this has been very effective in terms of pushing the Mexican agenda through the legislature in the United States. Then we have local diplomacy. Few people know this, but Mexico has the largest consular network that a country has in another country. 50 consulates just in the United States. In the rest of the world, we have 80 embassies. Just in the US, we have 50 consulates. And what do we do by this? We penetrate US politics, economics, and social issues at the local level at the 50 most important US cities. And through there, we work the Mexican agenda. And finally, we also conduct public diplomacy with local actors, but also in Washington, and also the diaspora diplomacy, trying to work with, but not being very successful with this diaspora of 36 million Mexicans that live within the US and represent 10% of the US population, and that means voters. Therefore, Mexico is trying to build a better relation with the US using this strategy of multi-level diplomacy, which is dedicating almost 50% of the budget of the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs and 50% of the personnel of the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs just to tackle and administer its relation with the US. Therefore, Mexico will be important, and I hope that the Biden administration coming into office is an opportunity to rebuild, but also make a stronger and better relationship between the US and Mexico, but also with the US and the rest of Latin America. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for being a bit more enthusiastic about the expectations of the Biden administration towards Latin America and especially Mexico. There are many issues raised that I would be happy to elaborate on, but we will probably have time to come back in our Q&A session. And now I would like to give the floor to my close colleague, to Professor Anita Oberda-Monkiewicz from my department, from Department of Area and Global Studies at the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies of the University of Warsaw. Professor Anita Oberda-Monkiewicz holds her PhD in the field of political science from the University of Warsaw. And her research interests revolve around the issue of the Western Hemisphere affairs, including Latin American issues, inter-American relations, development of the drug trade in Latin America, or the position of Brazil and Mexico in international relations. And she is the author of numerous articles in the field of Latin American studies, but especially I would like to underline her book, The U.S. Policy Toward Latin America After the Cold War. So she is really the right person from our department to talk in this panel about Latin America and U.S. relations. And I asked Anita to focus especially on Venezuela, which is going to be probably one of the most important issues in incoming weeks and months and years. So Professor Anita Oberda-Monkiewicz, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Jana. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation for such an interesting seminar on Latin America. and to be part of this meeting among such distinguished guests. So thank you very much. It's always a pleasure for me. So once again, thank you for having me. It's not an easy job to say something new, being the last speaker, especially when you agree with most of the conclusions that were already mentioned. However, I will do my best to say something about Venezuela. As you know, I mostly concentrate and focus in my research on Mexico and Brazil, but I like challenges. So today I would like to also include Venezuela into our discussion. I was asked to have a look at the current situation, the current relations between Venezuela and the United States, and possible potential changes that could be actually implemented by the new administration of Joe Biden. As the common knowledge says, and probably all of us know, Venezuela is perceived as one of the leading troublemakers by the United States administration since at least the end of 20th century and the election of Chavez. And right now, under the Maduro administration, his ideological and political heart, I think the situation is even more controversial and more crucial. As Professor Rubinsky mentioned, Venezuela is also one of very few issues that can count on bipartisan consensus in the United States Congress. So I think that it will be also quite important hub for the new Biden's administration and his policy towards Latin America. Of course, during the last few decades, United States were concentrating on dealing with Venezuela by using different methods and different techniques. In my opinion, they have one thing in common. All of them were quite inefficient, I would say. George W. Bush were trying to conduct a quite confrontational policy, mostly focusing on opposing Chavez. If you are talking about Obama, he was preferring a lower profile in his engagement, in his approach towards Venezuela, and he was mostly concentrating on supporting the opposition. However, the situation changed with Donald Trump in power because his policy towards Venezuela was quite inconsistent. And I would say it was somewhere between neglect and intimidation. It may be quite controversial, but I think that his approach towards Venezuela was mostly motivated by domestic issues. And Professor Schiavon were saying about this intermestic character of inter-American relations, and I think this is also the case because Donald Trump was not exactly interested in Venezuela for a long time. It started to be more pushy. It started to conduct more hardline policy towards Caracas when he started to link this issue with domestic things, like, for example, the potential votes from Latino voters in Florida. He started to tighten sanction policy because he knows that it will have a beneficial effect for his votes, especially in those states that are dominated by the Latino voters. So I think that this neglect was quite crucial, and it has a long-term consequences in many different dimensions. If we are talking about Donald Trump's policy towards Venezuela, as I said, it was more hardline policy because he was concentrating both on one level on supporting the opposition, because he was one of the first leaders of Latin America to recognize Juan Guaido, for example, as the official president at interim, let's say. And in the same time, he started to impose sanctions towards Venezuela, sanctions which were of economic, but also character, but also oil sanctions. I would say that this was one element of his strategy to intimidate in some way Venezuela, because he was also mentioning the possibility of conducting or arranging a military intervention. I think it was just a way of rhetoric speaking, because in reality, probably he wasn't so interested in doing so, and he would not have any kind of essence and support to conduct any kind of this kind of interventions. The other thing, which is, in my opinion, quite interesting here, is the fact that his policy was an utter failure. He was conducting unilaterally, which was, I would say, the bad beginning, because if you act alone, you cannot count for important and long-term effects. So probably this was one of the reasons why this policy was at last inefficient in many ways. The other thing, this sanction was were actually not successful if we're talking about international relations. They were quite helpful for Donald Trump's policy because they helped him to boost his position amongst the Latino voters. In some way, it also helped to galvanize the international support for Juan Guaido. That was the good thing. But generally speaking, this sanction policy was not efficient, nothing changed. And I would even say that sanctions with the connection with a total neglect and malign neglect of Venezuela by Donald Trump administration led to a situation when a kind of political vacuum was created around Venezuela, because United States were not actually engaged in Venezuelan crisis, were not interested in finding a solution for the crisis. And this vacuum was, of course, very soon filled by other players like China, like Russia, and I'm sure that Professor Rubinsky has a lot of things to add here, because I think that international relations doesn't like vacuums, and if somebody is neglecting one issue, probably there will be other actors interested, and that was the case in Venezuela. So the Donald Trump's policy led to the situation when Maduro administration became more consolidated with more international support. And I would even say that right now Maduro government is entrenched like it was never before. So it will be quite difficult for Joe Biden to deal with the case. So Trump administration's policy towards Venezuela was one of these US experiments towards this country to try to find a good solution for the problem. However, it wasn't very successful. So right now, I think the most important question is what Joe Biden would do with Venezuela. And I think that he will be interested in this issue. However, I totally agree with Professor Payan that domestic issues will dominate his agenda. So Latin America would be like of a second interest area for his administration. I hope at least second third area. If we are talking about Joe Biden and the expectation what he could change in US foreign policy towards Venezuela, I assume that mostly he would concentrate in shifting to different tone and different style in his foreign policy, but probably he will maintain the most important goals of United States engagement in Venezuela. So first of all, everybody expects, including me, that his activity, his engagement in the region will be more consistent, more cohesive, more predictable. And that's for sure things that I think would be quite interesting for all of us. But of course, there is no one strategy, at least for the time being, towards Latin America. And all we can know, all we can guess, we can assume just from the first speeches when he refers to Latin America. And going to that information, we can expect that referring to Venezuela, his policy will be more based on humanitarian approach. So he will maintain sanctions, that's for sure, because he's really against dictatorships. He wants to rebuild the moral authority of the United States in the region. So he's supporting human rights, he's against dictators, he's against any kind of violation of rule of law. So that's the thing that led us to Venezuela, and his activity make us to expect some kind of intensified activity towards Venezuela. So probably he will maintain sanctions, but add to them a new dimension, sort of humanitarian dimension. So his advisor, Juan Gonzalez, who was already mentioned here, said that that Joe Biden would sustain a system, a strategy based on sanction, but it will be a kind of smart sanctions against Venezuela. So they will be more targeted, they will be more flexible, and of course they will not be acting in this political vacuum. So they will be part of the biggest strategy, the broader strategy that would include also international community, that would include many other players like NGOs, etc. Of course, sanctions are important for Biden because probably he would concentrate on mitigating the negative effects that sanctions have on the society. Because as I said before, sanctions are not actually effective if we are thinking about ousting the ruling president, but they have very negative effects on the society, of the Venezuelan society. That's probably this will be the issue which will lead the Biden's engagement in Venezuela's crisis. Of course, Joe Biden's announced that he will be supporting Juan Guaido as the opposition leader, as the legal representative of Venezuela. So that's for sure. This will be the line of the U.S. foreign policy. And I think that he will be trying to be more multilateral. Even if I maybe not pessimist like Professor Payan, I would say I'm a moderate optimist, not saying skeptic. However, I would like to believe that Joe Biden would cooperate with multilateral institutions. We try to convince them to take part in trying to find a solution for the Venezuelan crisis. For example, the European Union. I agree that the role of the EU is diminishing right now, or is limited because of pandemic and many other issues. However, this is also a space when we can expect that Joe Biden will try to broaden a little bit his agenda in Venezuela. Maybe just two things for the conclusion, because I know that we are under the pressure of time. On the domestic level, I think that Joe Biden would concentrate on expanding the temporary protected status to the Venezuelan exiles. We know that President Trump, in the last hours of his presidency, decided to grant this status to the Venezuelan in the United States. Probably this will be also the case for Joe Biden. And again, here we have these interdomestic relations that the potential voters are quite important for the American politician. And going to a very global level and saying that very briefly, I think that also China would be interesting in the Venezuelan perspective for Biden. We know that Biden thinks that China is one of the biggest threats for the United States, including Latin America, and of course the Chinese involvement, Russian involvement, Cuban or the Iranian involvement in the Venezuelan crisis is also quite dangerous for the United States interest. So probably he would like to, he will concentrate to neutralize the role of these international players in some way. How? We do not know yet, maybe by including them into kind of multilateral initiatives, who knows, there are different options and different opinions, but I'm sure he will be trying to a little bit internationalize the problem in Venezuela and include as many actors, as many players to find a solution there as it would be possible. However, of course, this is a wishful thinking, but in reality, I think that probably Joe Biden will concentrate on domestic issues, as I said. And if we are talking about Latin America, I think that the order of our presentation today was quite interesting because, in my opinion, the priority would be placed in the same order. First, United States, later Mexico and Brazil, Colombia as quite important and loyal supporter of the United States in the region. And if we're talking about different topics, migration, like in Mexico and Colombia, and environment, like in the case of Brazil. So I think that there will be many, many issues included. But of course, I would like to underline just in my conclusion, the fact that I would like to see that his policy would be more pragmatic. He would be more engaged, because we know that he's one of the most experienced, both in terms of foreign policy and in Latin America, presidents of the United States recently. So I hope that we will not witness another stage of benign neglect, but I would like to see a quite effective engagement. So this would be my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for your conclusions. And for raising many question marks as well about Venezuela, about the future of Venezuela and about the future of bilateral relations and this relevant topic that Venezuela still is for Latin America and for the whole globe, I believe. Thank you all of you once again for your presentations and for being so precise. We didn't have much time for the presentations. Now we will move to the question and answers session. All of you are invited kindly to put on a chat if you would like to ask a question. So I will wait and then give the floor to all the people that would like to ask or comment. We will also have a look at the chat at YouTube streaming. So if somebody watching us on YouTube would like to comment or ask any specific question, then there will be possibility. We will put this question here. And since I have the advantage of being the chair of this panel, I would like to ask the first two questions very shortly. First question I will direct to Professor Tony Payan. If you could just comment on this point of view, that you talked about this pragmatic view of Biden administration, and you talked that many Latin American countries don't have any strategy towards US. And I would like to ask you if you see any point in any special issue that would change it, so that Latin American countries would start to have their own strategy towards the US, and what could be this I think that would shift their relations with the US. And also, I would like to direct a short question towards Professor Maria Hermina Tavares about Brazil. If you believe if the fact that we have Joe Biden as president in the US, do you believe that this is going to have the effect on the results of the presidential elections in Brazil, next presidential elections in Brazil? So if you could comment shortly about these issues, I would be more than happy. Professor Payan.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question, Joanna. Look, I think I have to agree with Jorge that many of the initiatives that can probably prosper and render greater fruit in the relationship between Latin America and the United States will have to come from Latin America. I have said in other forums that much of what happens in the bilateral relationship between Mexico and the United States will depend on López Obrador. If he changes his ways, if he reconceives Mexican interests differently and jointly with the United States, I think this will be a very fruitful relationship. If he continues to have a fundamental idea of Mexico that clashes with the United States, it'll be a very unproductive relationship. I think Biden will be so busy over here that it actually, in the United States, I mean, I'm in Texas right now, that it actually opens a great opportunity for Latin American leaders to come to Washington and bring an agenda and actually say, look, this is what we want to accomplish. This is what we want to achieve. So not all is dry and void of opportunity here, but it will depend on what the Latin American leaders want to accomplish. I see, for example, a complicated vision between Bolsonaro and his idea of how to handle issues on environmental issues, human rights issues, and what Biden has to accomplish. So it'll depend on what Bolsonaro wants, how flexible he wants to be to move back and forth on those issues and pursue a rapprochement with Washington. Same thing with Mexico. I think Colombia is best positioned because Colombia has been a strategic ally, and Colombia has been very flexible in accommodating American interests, particularly with the guerrilla and with the war on drugs. And in that sense, I think it's the best position. And they've been very flexible at moving back and forth, regardless of who's the president. So there is an opportunity, but I think it'll be largely on the side of Latin American leaders. That's where I think it's going to be. They have a different view of the issues. But again, I want to insist, interests are not fixed. The constructivist school of international relations, as you all well know, posits that interest can also be constructed. And so will the Latin American leaders be able to read Washington differently and to accept that there is an opportunity for redefining their own interests, operationalizing them into actual proposals and taking them to Washington? And I want to remind you, I'm going to say something that is often sacrilegious in Mexico, but it is true. In 1988, after a very controversial election, Salinas took office, and Salinas redefined Mexico's interests. And the North American Free Trade Agreement was fundamentally an initiative of Mexico, which Mexico took to Washington. And that changed the relationship for a very long time to this day. So clearly, Salinas read the times right with all his defects and issues. I'm not defending the Salinas regime and the way he got to office or anything, but he was able to read the times and move accordingly. Will Latin American leaders do that? I am not certain that Bolsonaro or López Obrador are willing to do that. Peru, Argentina, Chile, I think Colombia are a different story. But I think the ball to end is on Latin America's court.
Okay, thank you very much. Also a big question. And Professor Maria Herminia Tavares, could you please refer to this question?
This is not an easy question because it regards the future, and the elections will be next year, actually, on October next year, and a lot of things can happen between now and then. If Trump had won the election, I think that this would strengthen Bolsonaro clearly, because he would have a plausible narrative about Brazil and about the world. And so this he has lost. But I don't know how much this can make his opposition stronger. It depends on how the opposition will build its rhetorics regarding the Bolsonaro government. I think the most important issues that have to do with the public evaluation of the government are the economy and the pandemic. And Bolsonaro is not doing well in both realms. They don't have a plan on how to deal with the mounting of COVID-19 now. It doesn't also have plans for the economic recovery, and the health situation in Brazil is very, very bad at this moment, and I think this will have an impact. But all depends on how the opposition can build a plausible narrative about what is happening. Today, there is increased perception that Brazil is an international pariah. And this is, wow, the minister said, well, better be a pariah than be a globalist, stuff like that. And this, I think that is a bad thing for Bolsonaro, because Brazilians were quite proud, perhaps candidly proud about what was the country's extent and the country's activity, international policy. So I think, of course, we have a lot of time between now and the future, and it all depends how the oppositions, actually, the oppositional forces will build some kind of rhetoric regarding the bad consequences of Bolsonaro international policies, foreign policies.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. I would like now to pass the microphone to Professor Rafał Latowski, who wants to ask the question.
Good morning. Thank you, Mrs. Chair. I have a stream of questions. May I ask for? Okay, all questions are provocative, so that's first point. Two questions to Professor Tony Payan. First issue, you have argued that the United States has no plan, no interest, and no resources to engage in the Latin America. So my two questions are: first, is this situation a symbol of the US decline? If the United States have even not money to invest in the region which is so close and historically so important, is it a symbol of the US decline? And my second question, is this situation a symbol of decline of Latin America? If it's not important, if it's not so important like before, maybe also the region simply lose the importance. Second, or third question, a question to Professor Maria Tavares. You have discussed the issue of Venezuela as a challenge for Brazil. May we argue that paradoxically, the Venezuelan crisis is favorable for Brazil? So Venezuela does not buy any weapon more, so the military challenge is disappearing. Brazil replaced Venezuela on the oil market. So from geoeconomic and geopolitical point of view, the Venezuelan crisis seems for me quite favorable for Brazil. And the last question for Professor Schiavon. You discussed different ties between the Mexico and the United States, and other panelists discussed the relations of other countries of Brazil, and so on. During the seminar, I checked also the trade balance of different Latin American countries, and it seems that Mexico is probably the last or one of the few countries that trade more with the United States than with China. So my question is Mexico the last friend of the United States in Latin America? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ulatowski. And now I would like to ask Professor Tony Payan to answer these two questions.
Thank you, Professor Ulatowski. I do think that that the United States has experienced a relative decline. Obviously, it remains a powerful nation militarily, economically, politically. I think Donald Trump eroded the U.S. Diplomatic or diplomatic standing, its political standing in the world. I think his vision was of a more insular, inward-looking nation, not one to engage others in regional or even domestic problem resolution. We saw it with the war in the brief period of conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, for example, where the United States simply ignored that issue, allowed Russia to move in and allowed Turkey to move in. He was not that interested in solving the issue with Iran. He didn't manage to solve the issue with North Korea. So he pushed certain agendas, but I think at the end of the day, I think he eroded the US position. I'm not certain that Biden will be able to reconstruct it for a number of things. There is a material reality, and that is the 21st century is not the American century. The signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, where China is a major partner, essentially constitutes the largest trade agreement in the history of the humankind. That involves 2.6 billion people. So I guess the center of the axis is shifting to Asia, to China, to Korea, to Japan, to Indonesia, to Southeast Asia, to India. So clearly this century, and the United States will have to accommodate those interests. And I think the best way for the United States to accommodate those interests, of course, is to engage international organizations. That was the whole idea of the TPP, was to get China into these international organizations and committed to a number of things. Trump threw away that opportunity and allowed China to move in and consolidate its position economically, worldwide, but also and especially in Asia. So yes, I think there is definitely a decline, and I think the United States at this point will have to begin to rebuild its political and diplomatic capital, just to be able to counter China's aggressiveness. By the way, this is accelerated by the COVID-19 crisis. At the end of the day, the United States is acquiring an enormous debt, $1.4 trillion, and then almost another $1 trillion, and Biden is proposing another $1 trillion, which means the United States will be reaching levels of indebtedness of 150% of its gross domestic product. That has to be paid in the future. That is going to take away, even though money is cheap right now, still it has to be paid. So monies will have to be committed to servicing the debt, and that is going to further erode the US ability to invest. Moreover, it is my sense in the different polls that I examine is that there is no stomach in the US public today to invest in financially in aid to other countries, in resolving other countries, in helping developing even Central America or other countries. In fact, most Americans are very ill-informed. They believe that the United States has subsidized the development of other countries, has invested too much abroad, when in reality, the US aid has always been very small. It is smaller than ever and is heavily conditioned, often to purchases from US companies by those countries like Haiti and Central America and other places. And a lot of it is armament, weapons that's sold by American companies. So there is a complete misunderstanding of how US aid works. It's very small, it's heavily conditioned, and it's mostly for the benefit of American companies. And there is no conception that the US has to invest perhaps billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars in development aid. The US doesn't do development aid. The US has not done development aid for a very long time, and it has not had success in developing other countries. I think, Germany and Japan after World War II. So the reality is that this country is not, and with its own crises, several, I think it's very much focused on itself, and there is no stomach for the United States to take leadership. So don't mistake Biden's return to multilateralism, return to international organizations, and his better disposition to be gentler with the possibility of a resurgent United States. The financial, the economic, the domestic conditions are not there. Look, the 41 million people in the United States currently receive food aid from the government. In a country of 330 million people, 41 million people have to be subsidized just to have food on the table. Yeah, just to have basic food to eat. Poverty in the United States is increasing, inequality is increasing, social conflict is increasing. There are too many problems in the United States to resolve, and Biden will be very busy there. And that's why I make the point that much of what happens in the relationship between Latin America and the United States will have to come from Latin America, will have to be proposals from them, and Biden may pay some attention, but at the end of the day, America is first, even under the Biden administration, and he knows that he's got too many problems on his plate. We have 15 million people who have no jobs. I mean, there's 15 million people who are looking for a job. Forget the ones that are not looking for a job. And we have also incredible demographic problems. The United States in 2020 grew almost 0%. The first time in 100 years, 120 years, that the United States has not grown. It's an aging nation. It's going to face issues like those of Europe and Japan. So the huge structural issues the United States has to deal with. And by the way, immigration can help correct some of that and introduce new vitality into this country. But right now we have to rebuild that immigration system. So clearly, I don't think the United States is in a position to lead at this point. It's barely in a position to react. And I think we will not see a US hegemony for a very long time.
Okay, thank you very much. But before moving into the next question about Brazil, I would like to ask all of you, all the panelists, maybe somebody of you would like to refer also to this question about the decline of the role and position of the US and maybe decline of the role and position of Latin America. Maybe Professor Ruwiński would like to add something shortly, because you has talked a bit about this issue as well.
Well, yes, I completely agree with the assessment given by Professor Payan about the decrease in capacity of the United States to influence with tangible instrument on the developments of different scenarios in Latin America. And I would like to add to this that the extra hemispheric actors, first of all, Russia and China, this is something I work a lot on, very well aware about this decline in capacity of the United States. And they have very different capacity themselves. Of course, China is actually there with all the might that China has. And that correctly was mentioned, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's made China even stronger than it was. And China is well aware of its capacity and what it can offer to Latin America in comparison to what the United States is not offering. But Russia, for example, is quite weak, and Russian economy has been impacted very much by the COVID-19, heavily impacted. I look also at some numbers, and the traditional income for Russia from oil is down for 40%. This is a lot. But Russia has positioned itself in a very unique way in Latin America. For example, in Venezuela, Maduro is well aware that perhaps Vladimir Putin is the only true ally he has on the global scale, because the rest of the allies have different kind of, and not truly allies, I mean, they have different kind of interests in Venezuela. But we see now a rapprochement of Russia to Argentina, rapprochement of Russia to Bolivia. Of course, it's about the vaccine, but the vaccine, what the Latin America is care about. And I would say that it will be very interesting to see what will be happening during the Biden administration in terms of these relations, the United States, China, Russia, and Latin America. Because from the Russian perspective, and I'm not talking from my perspective, I'm talking from the Russian perspective of Vladimir Putin's perspective and the Russian elites, they see the world in a very particular way. They're convinced that the West is against them, that the United States is against them, and they have to defend themselves. So they apply this logic of reciprocity, mostly symbolic reciprocity, which is equally damaging to what they consider it to be. And we just talk about this as it may be not as true as Russians think it is. The importance of Latin America for the United States is far different than it used to be during the Cold War. But the Russians think Latin America is still important for the United States. That is why they are eager to increase their presence, but they are very smart because they use a different kind of tools. For example, RT, Russia Today, Sputnik Mundo, became so powerful, they actually brainwashing many Latin Americans. They now rely on them as their alternative and the only source of information. So I think we will see a really interesting development from that perspective. And it depends very much on what, again, Professor Payan was saying. For Biden, the relation with Russia is important. But this may have this impact on what will be happening in Latin America, because Russia is in Venezuela and Russia is interested to see what will be happening to Venezuela.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have to move to another question because we are squeezed of time. And I would like to pass the floor to Professor Maria Ermina. And if later on, maybe Anita or Berta would like to comment on the same issue as well, because it's about Venezuela mostly. So please, Professor Maria Ermina Tavares.
Oh, thank you. Well, Professor Latowski has posed a very challenging and provocative question. Is the Venezuela crisis beneficial to Brazil? Well, I don't think so. First of all, we don't have military problems with Venezuela. What we have with Venezuela now, due to the crisis, is an immigration problem, not so huge as Colombia has, because people go to Colombia more than to Brazil. But anyway, since the states are in the borders are very poor, we had a small humanitarian crisis in the border states due to immigration. The second problem, which is not only with Venezuela, is narco-traffic. Having crisis at the border is a problem for Brazil, because it makes easy for drugs to come to Brazil. So the crisis doesn't help to solve this problem. Quite on the contrary, it weakens the Brazilian capacity to deal with it. The third issue with Venezuela is that Brazil had a significant partnership with Venezuela in oil initiatives, and this also is gone due to the crisis. And also in the 10s, Venezuela was among the 10 countries that most important in terms of trade, and so this is also no longer exists. So I cannot see any benefit of the Venezuelan crisis. On the other way, for Brazil not being part of the negotiation, not playing a role in some kind of negotiated transition in Brazil. It's no good also for Brazil, which thinks itself as a factor of stability in the region, would have some aspiration to have some role, some political role in the region. So I cannot see clear benefits of the Venezuelan crisis. I think I should give the floor to my other colleagues, or give the screen to my other colleagues. And if I have time, I can answer your question, Joanna, about the declining capacities, okay?
Okay, now we will pass the same question, maybe shortly, to Professor Anita Oberda. If there is any Latin American or other partner that has some advantage of Venezuelan crisis, as you see it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think it will be very difficult to say, because I agree with Professor Tavares that the situation in Venezuela right now is not beneficial for Brazil. I think that it's not beneficial for anybody. It could be in normal situation, right? Because we know that Venezuela and Brazil was perceived as a kind of leaders of regional integration. They have different visions how the region should develop. So probably in, let's say, normal situation, if I can use this totally politically incorrect term, it could be useful, because of course it will give more floor to Brazilian vision, how the region should develop, the Brazilian leadership, etc. However, right now I think that Venezuela is more the source of regional problems, is the source of massive migration that affects the neighboring countries, and is one of the most destabilizing factor in the region. It is also connected with the erosion of Mercosur in some way, because it influenced very negatively the role of and the efficiency of the organization. It attracts not always welcomed interest from extra regional partners, like professors said before. For example, not entirely positive interest of China or the Russian activity. So I think that Venezuela right now is mostly a source of a problem, not something that could be treated or perceived as beneficial for the regional integration, cooperation, or any specific country. So very briefly, this is my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I would like to pass the microphone to Professor Jorge Scavion to answer the question raised by Professor Ulatowski.
Thank you, Rafael, for your question. It's wonderful to see you, at least virtually. Yes, there is a declining relation between the US and the rest of the hemisphere. However, Mexico is different, and not that Mexico is a friend of the US or the US is a friend of Mexico, because countries have no friends, they have interests. So there are three variables which explain the reasons why Mexico is still so close to the US in terms of trade. First and foremost, geography. When you see the level of concentration of trade that Latin American countries have vis-a-vis the US, obviously Mexico, which is closer, is 80% of its exports. When you go to Central America, it goes down to somewhere between 50 and 60%. When you go to the northern part of South America, that is the Andean countries, it goes down to somewhere between 40 and 50%. And when you go to the southern cone, then it goes to 30%. So geography has a lot to do. Second, it has to do also in terms of the models of development which the countries of Latin America have decided to implement in the course of the last at least 3 decades. In the case of Mexico, Mexico changed dramatically, and we became an exporter of manufacturers, while the rest of Latin America is mostly an exporter of commodities. That means that we do export mostly into the United States, but we do manufactures. And by the way, China is our second trading partner. However, The trade that Mexico has with China is we import from China inputs to put into manufacture and then re-export into the United States. That is completely different with the rest of Latin America, which mostly the trade with China is commodities. And finally, the third one has to do with security concerns. We are the country to the south of the US, and the US doesn't like to have its competitors or enemies, whatever you want to call them, in its southern border. So Mexico has known how to work this relation with the competitors. We did it during the Cold War with a relation with the Soviet Union. Yes, we played with it, but we were never close to them. The same happens with our relation with China. Yes, we play with it. However, it is good for economy, but we are not willing to open widely our doors, for example, for Chinese investment. Two of the biggest projects that China had tried to do in Mexico in the course of the last 10 years finally dropped. One of them was a train between Mexico City and one of the largest cities in the central Mexico, which is Querétaro. And the other one was the Dragon Mart in Cancun for exporting to the rest of Latin America. Both of them finally collapsed, mostly due to US pressures and also in terms of some problems with corruption in Mexico. But Chinese investment is one of the lowest in terms of percentage in Mexico compared to the rest of Latin America. So these are the three reasons why we're still so close to the US and so far away from God and also so far away from China.
Okay, thank you very much again. We don't have much time, so the last question, and Professor Aleksandra Jaskulska wanted to ask some particular questions, so Ola, please ask at the moment. And you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you for reminding me. So thank you for the wonderful seminar. It was really great to hear all of you. I know that we are running out of time, so I will direct my question only to one of the panelists. I would like to ask the perception of regular people, if I may say, in Mexico after Biden victory. And also how it was presented in the news. Was it different in the public and private news? Basically, is Joe Biden seen as some kind of a savior to Mexico? I'm talking mostly about migration, but not only, some that he can really make a change, or maybe not. And my question is for Professor Jorge Schiavone. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your great question. And by the way, we have a huge project, Maria Herminia is part of it, which is on public opinion and foreign affairs in Latin America. So we do have the answer for your question. We ask Latin Americans, and specifically in this case, Mexicans, what they think about leaders around the world. And we've been doing this for the last 20 years. It's impressive that the leader which was best evaluated by Mexicans in the whole history was the Pope, for number one, but second, it was Obama. Obama was the most liked leader of the world for the Mexican public in the last 20 years. And the least liked leader in the whole world over Maduro and over Chavez, that is, well, actually it's under them, was Donald Trump. So we have this perception of not only the US, but we are able to differentiate amongst its leaders. We don't have still the information from our survey about Biden, but we do have some other surveys. And obviously, once again, the Mexican public likes Biden a lot because they see him as someone who will be able to work with and therefore try to solve Mexico's problems and also those of the bilateral relations. So yes, we do have information about that, and we have done it for the last 20 years, and we invite you to see all the reports and all the information of the project, which are publicly and freely available in lasamericasYelmundo.cide.edu, where you can see the information of all the Latin American countries in which we'll be doing this. And once again, thank you, Maria Herminia, for being such a great leader of this project in Brazil.
Thank you so much, Professor. And it's also great that I can look for the information from the other countries. It's perfect. Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Quite promising. And now only very shortly, because Professor Maria Herminia Tavares wanted to refer to the declining role of probably of Brazil and US, but we have only 1 minute to focus on this. Okay.
To be very brief, and this is a very contradictory issue. I think that today China is a very important in economic terms for Brazil. For instance, in the issue of the production of vaccines, China we buy from China and from India the inputs that will enable us to produce the vaccine in Brazil. In the recovery, we will need a lot of infrastructure investment, and if the United States and the United States firms don't come, the Chinese will come, and this is clear for on the other hand, Brazil is a Western country. We have democratic institutions that have been inspired, if not copied, from the North American institutions. We see ourselves as a part of the Western world. And so I think there will be tensions between economic interests and the political models that are important for Brazil. This is a really brief answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. I appreciate very much your presentations, interesting, relevant, fruitful in conclusions, and rich in expectations. Unfortunately, we don't have more time to elaborate on many issues raised here, but it was a great pleasure and great scientific advantage to listen to you. So now I have to pass the floor to Professor Jakub Zajączkowski, and I will do this, but really hope to listen to you again and meet maybe in some post-COVID reality at the University of Warsaw and to talk more about these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I think on behalf of all of us for your excellent moderation of this panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joanna, for great chairing, and also we are very happy as a faculty that we could host this seminar together with our international partners, and it was a very great, very good seminar, and I think it is the first such a seminar, and we'll continue. We would be very interested to have a closer cooperation with you, as Joanna said. You answer for a lot of questions, but it is still a lot of questions to answer, and I hope it is just a beginning, and I hope we'll meet very soon again on a webinar, and later also in Warsaw. And once again, on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty, Professor Daniel Fostek, we would like to thank all panelists, and also Joanna for chairing, because it was great pleasure. It was great pleasure for us to take part in such a wonderful seminar. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now I think we'll finish now live streaming. So if you could wait still 5 minutes, because we would like to talk with you, just one